The flashbang detonated 3 seconds early. In the controlled chaos of the BUD/S training compound at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, 3 seconds was the difference between a teaching moment and a medical emergency. The explosive device meant to simulate combat conditions for the SEAL candidates practicing building clearance malfunctioned in a way that sent shrapnel in an unpredictable scatter pattern across the training area. Petty Officer Second Class Sloan Callahan felt the impact before she registered the sound. Something hot and sharp struck her left forearm with enough force to spin her partially around. Her medical kit slung across her shoulder took the brunt of another piece of metal that would have caught her in the ribs. Blood began flowing immediately, painting dark streaks down her tan uniform. The training exercise halted. Instructors were already moving, shouting orders, activating emergency protocols. 2 Navy corpsmen stationed at the perimeter began running toward her position. Sloan held up her right-hand palm out. "Stop," her voice cut through the commotion with a clarity that came from years of speaking over gunfire and explosions. "I'm good. Continue the exercise. Candidates you have wounded on the objective. What's your next move?" The SEAL candidates, frozen in uncertainty, stared at her. The instructors looked at each other, then back at Sloan, who was already pulling a tourniquet from her kit with her uninjured hand. "Ma'am, you need immediate medical attention," one of the approaching corpsmen called out. "I need you to stay in position and let these candidates complete their training." Sloan's voice remained steady despite the blood now dripping from her fingertips. She applied the tourniquet one-handed with the kind of practiced efficiency that made it look easy, though anyone with medical training knew it wasn't. "Candidates, I asked you a question. You have wounded on the objective and hostiles potentially still active. What do you do?" A senior candidate, his face pale but his jaw set, made a decision. "Peterson Anders established security. Chen with me. We're getting the corpsmen to cover and calling for Casabac." "Good." Sloan allowed them to move her behind a concrete barrier while maintaining her own assessment of the wound. "Now talk me through your casualty evaluation protocol." For the next 7 minutes, while the training cadre coordinated actual medical response and the range safety officer investigated the malfunction, Sloan Callahan conducted an impromptu teaching session on combat casualty care. She used her own injury as the practical demonstration, walking the candidates through triage priorities, tourniquet placement verification, and communication protocols with evacuation assets. By the time the medical team arrived with proper equipment, the bleeding was controlled, her vital signs were stable, and she had successfully turned a training accident into a teaching opportunity that those candidates would remember for the rest of their careers. The observation room overlooking the training area had fallen completely silent. Senior instructors who had seen thousands of sailors come through these programs stood watching the monitors with expressions that ranged from impressed to unsettled. This small woman, 5'4" and maybe 120 pounds soaking wet, had just demonstrated a level of composure under duress that most of their candidates aspired to achieve. Commander John Barrett, leader of SEAL Team 3, had been in that observation room reviewing candidate performance. He made a mental note of Sloan's name and looked up her service record while the medical team transported her to the base clinic for proper treatment. What he found was interesting. Sloan Callahan, 29 years old, had served 5 years as a Navy hospital corpsman with multiple deployments to Afghanistan attached to Marine units. Her medical qualifications were impeccable. Her fitness reports were outstanding. Her recommendation letters from Marine commanders used words like exceptional, irreplaceable, and combat proven. What the record didn't show, what was carefully omitted from her official file, was anything that would explain the absolute calm she had displayed. That kind of composure wasn't taught in corpsman school. It was forged in circumstances that left permanent marks on a person's capacity to function when everything was falling apart. Commander Barrett had seen it before in operators who had been places and done things that didn't make it into official reports. He made a second mental note to request Sloan's full service record, including any classified attachments. 3 weeks later, Sloan stood in the briefing room of SEAL Team 3 headquarters, her left forearm still wrapped in a light bandage, though the wound had healed cleanly. 16 stitches and no complications. She had refused the recommended 2 weeks of light duty and returned to work after 5 days. Commander Barrett stood at the front of the room with 12 of his team members seated in chairs facing him. They were all men ranging in age from mid-20s to early 40s, all carrying themselves with the particular brand of quiet confidence that came from being among the most elite warriors in the world. "Gentlemen," Barrett began, "I'd like to introduce Petty Officer Second Class Sloan Callahan. She'll be joining us as the team corpsman for our next rotation." The reaction was polite but reserved, professional acknowledgement without enthusiasm. Sloan had expected this. She was the first female corpsman assigned to an active SEAL team, and while the men in this room were too professional to voice overt skepticism, she could read it in their body language. A stocky senior enlisted man in his late 30s spoke up first. "Ma'am, welcome aboard. Gunny Kowalski, Team Sergeant. You got combat experience." "Yes, Gunny. 3 deployments to Afghanistan with 1st Marine Expeditionary Force." "Which unit specifically?" The question came from a younger SEAL with a southern accent. His name tape read Matthews, Reconnaissance Battalion, attached to various force recon elements. That got their attention. Marine Force Reconnaissance operated in some of the most dangerous terrain in Afghanistan, conducting deep reconnaissance and direct action missions that rarely made the news. Corpsmen who served with them were either exceptionally skilled or they didn't last long. "How long were you with Recon?" Commander Barrett asked. 13 months with the same battalion. Shorter attachments before and after for specific operations." Kowalski leaned back in his chair, reassessing. "You see much contact?" "Enough to know what it looks like when things go sideways." Sloan kept her voice level professional. She wasn't here to impress them with war stories. She was here to do a job. Another SEAL older with graying temples studied her with narrowed eyes. Master Chief Wade Sullivan had been with the teams for 23 years and had developed an instinct for reading people that bordered on supernatural. Something about this woman's bearing suggested depths that her official record didn't reflect. "Petty Officer Callahan." Sullivan's voice was gravelly from years of shouting commands over gunfire and helicopter rotors. "What's the worst casualty situation you've handled in the field?" The room went quiet. It was a test question, but also genuine curiosity. How someone answered said a lot about their experience and their judgment. Sloan met his gaze directly. "Ambush outside Sangin. 12 casualties over 18 hours with limited supplies and no air support. Stabilized 7 critical patients with improvised equipment while under sustained enemy fire. Lost 9 when our position was overrun during extraction." The silence that followed her answer was different from before. Every man in that room understood what she had just described, understood the calculations and compromises required to keep anyone alive under those conditions, understood the weight of losing 9 after fighting for 18 hours to save them. "3 made it out?" Sullivan asked quietly. "3 made it out." Barrett cleared his throat, bringing the briefing back to its official purpose. "Petty Officer Callahan has been briefed on our operational tempo and training requirements. She'll be participating in all team activities, including physical training, weapons qualifications, and tactical exercises. She'll be evaluated like any other team member." "Questions?" Matthews raised his hand. "Ma'am, no disrespect intended, but can you keep up with Team PT?" It was a fair question. SEAL physical training was notorious for its intensity, designed to maintain the extreme fitness levels required for their mission set. Sloan was fit by any normal standard, but normal standards didn't apply here. "Guess we'll find out tomorrow morning at 0500, she replied evenly. The next morning demonstrated exactly what she had meant. The PT session started with a 4-mile run at a pace that would have broken most recreational runners. Sloan finished in the middle of the pack, not the fastest, but far from the slowest. The strength circuit that followed was harder. She could do the pull-ups and push-ups, though her smaller frame meant she had to work harder to move the same weights during the lifting portion. By the end of the 2-hour session, that she was exhausted but still standing. Several of the SEALs were breathing hard themselves. Matthews, who had asked about her fitness level, gave her a respectful nod as they headed to the showers. "Not bad, Doc," he said, using the nickname that corpsmen traditionally earned in Marine and SEAL units. "Not done yet," Sloan replied, though privately she was grateful for the hot shower that would ease muscles that were already beginning to cramp. The real test came 3 days later during a training exercise in the California desert. The scenario involved a long-range patrol with the team moving through rough terrain while carrying full combat loads, weapons, ammunition, water, and specialized equipment that brought each man's pack weight to over 80 pounds. Sloan's medical rig alone weighed 40 pounds, packed with supplies to handle everything from gunshot wounds to heat casualties to chemical exposure. On top of that, she carried her personal weapon, ammunition, water, and communications gear. Her total load was over 70 pounds on a frame that weighed less than 120. 10 miles into the patrol, as the desert sun reached its peak intensity and the temperature climbed past 100 degrees, Corporal Danny Hayes started showing signs of trouble. He was a newer team member, 23 years old, and still adapting to the extreme physical demands. His pace began to slow. His face went from red to pale. His movements became slightly uncoordinated. Sloan noticed before anyone else. She quickened her pace to move up next to him, studying his gait and breathing pattern while maintaining her own position in the patrol formation. Hayes, she said quietly, her voice pitched to carry only to him and the men immediately around them. How you feeling? Good to go, Doc. The automatic response of someone who had been trained never to show weakness. That wasn't a judgment. That was a medical assessment question. Answer honestly. Hayes hesitated, then admitted, little dizzy. Probably just need to hydrate. Sloan watched his pupils, slightly dilated despite the bright sunlight. She noted the fine tremor in his hands and the way he was overcompensating for balance issues. Commander, request halt for medical check. Barrett called the patrol to a halt without hesitation. In the field, the Corpsman's medical authority superseded rank when it came to health and safety issues. The team took security positions while Sloan moved Hayes into shade cast by a large rock formation. Talk to me, she said, pulling out a thermometer and blood pressure cuff from her rig. Really, Doc, I'm fine. Just pushed a little hard. Your pupils are dilated, you're showing impaired motor control, and you're compensating for balance issues. That's not pushed hard. That's heat exhaustion approaching heat stroke. If I don't treat you now, you'll be unconscious in 30 minutes and potentially brain damaged if your core temperature keeps rising. She worked efficiently, checking his vital signs and pulling cooling packs from her medical rig. His core temperature was 103.5 degrees, not critical yet, but trending in a dangerous direction. You're done for today, she announced, then keyed her radio. Base, this is Team 3. We have one heat casualty requiring evacuation. Non-critical, but needs cooling and monitoring. Request vehicle pickup at our current grid. Hayes started to protest, but Kowalski cut him off. Doc says you're done, no arguments. We all pushed too hard in training at some point and learned why there are medical protocols. While they waited for the pickup vehicle, Sloan continued treatment. She had Hayes in the shade with cooling packs on his major arteries, forcing him to drink water with electrolyte tablets in small, frequent sips. She monitored his vitals every 5 minutes and logged everything in her medical notes. The other team members watched this process with growing respect. She hadn't hesitated, hadn't doubted her assessment, hadn't been intimidated by Hayes' insistence that he was fine or worried about looking overly cautious. She had made a medical decision and executed it with confidence. That evening back at base, Barrett pulled Sloan aside. Good call today. Hayes' temperature was still climbing when the vehicle got him back here. Medical says another hour in that heat, and he would have been in serious trouble. Just doing my job, sir. That's the second time I've seen you stay calm when things got complicated. The BUD/S incident and today. That kind of composure under pressure is unusual. He paused, studying her. Your service record is very good, petty officer, but it's also very sparse on certain details. 3 deployments with Marine Recon, and I can only find official documentation for about half your time deployed. Sloan's expression didn't change, but Barrett noticed a subtle shift in her posture, a tightening around her eyes that suggested he had touched on something she preferred not to discuss. Some operations don't generate detailed paperwork, sir. I'm sure you're familiar with that. I am, which is why I put in a request for your complete service record, including any classified attachments. Barrett's voice remained professional, but carried an edge of command. I need to know who I'm working with. If there are capabilities or complications I should be aware of now, is the time to tell me. Sir, and I'm a corpsman. I keep people alive. That's what I'm here to do. And if keeping people alive requires more than medical skills, the question hung between them. Sloan held his gaze for a long moment before responding. Then I use whatever skills are necessary to complete the mission. Same as anyone else on this team. Barrett nodded slowly. Fair enough, but Sloan, if you're carrying something from your previous deployments, trauma guilt, whatever you need to deal with it before it affects your performance here. This team depends on every member being fully mission capable, physically and mentally. We have resources available if you need them. I appreciate that, sir. I'm good. It was the same thing she always said, Amisa, the same deflection she had perfected over 3 years of people asking if she was okay, if she needed help, if she wanted to talk about what had happened in that valley outside Sangin. She was good. She had to be good. Because if she wasn't good, then 9 Marines had died for nothing, and that was a thought she couldn't allow herself to entertain. Barrett let her go, but he made another mental note. This woman was carrying something heavy. The question was whether she could carry it and still do her job or whether it would eventually break her under the weight. 2 weeks into her assignment with SEAL Team 3, Sloan had settled into the rhythm of the team. She participated in training exercises, maintained her medical readiness, and slowly earned the respect of men who had initially viewed her assignment with skepticism. She didn't demand acceptance. She earned it through consistent performance and quiet competence. but Master Chief Sullivan continued to watch her with particular attention. He had seen something during that first briefing, heard something in the way she described losing 9 casualties that suggested there was more to her story than the official record revealed. During a weapons maintenance session, he found an opportunity to observe her more closely. The team was cleaning and inspecting their equipment after a day on the range, and Sloan was working on her personal sidearm, a standard-issue M9 Beretta. Sullivan watched as her hands moved through the disassembly process with unconscious efficiency. But it was what happened next that caught his attention. She reached for the cleaning supplies, and her hand moved 6 inches to the left, toward where a rifle cleaning kit would be stored, before she caught herself and corrected to grab the pistol cleaning kit. Muscle memory. But not muscle memory for a pistol. Muscle memory for something bigger. Later that week, during a combat life-saving refresher course that Sloan was leading for the team, Sullivan noticed another detail. When she was demonstrating proper positioning for treating a chest wound, her hands moved to position an imaginary patient in a way that would provide both cover from enemy fire and a clear line of sight to potential threats. Corpsmen were taught to find covered positions when treating casualties, but they weren't taught to consider fields of fire and tactical positioning with the automatic precision she had just demonstrated. That was something else, something that came from training that went beyond standard combat medicine. Sullivan said nothing, but he filed away these observations. Something didn't add up about Sloan Callahan. Her official records said she was a corpsman who had served with distinction in a combat role. Everything about her behavior suggested she had been trained for something additional, something that required the kind of split-second tactical awareness in weapon familiarity that took years to develop. The classified service record that Barrett had requested finally arrived 3 weeks after Sloan joined the team. It came in a sealed envelope marked with classifications that required Commander Barrett to read it alone in a secure facility. What he found made him sit back in his chair and stare at the pages for a long time. Sloan Callahan had indeed served as a Navy corpsman with Marine reconnaissance units, but that had been her cover assignment. Her actual role for 18 months between 2019 and 2021 had been something entirely different. She had been part of a highly classified program run jointly by the CIA and Joint Special Operations Command. Female operators who could move through Middle Eastern environments where male soldiers drew immediate attention. The program had deployed fewer than 20 women over its 5-year existence, and most of their missions remained classified at the highest levels. Sloan's specialty within that program was listed in sparse clinical language: precision marksman, counterterrorism operations, high-value target elimination. She was a sniper. The record showed 47 confirmed eliminations at ranges between 800 and 1,400 meters. 0 failed missions, multiple commendations that couldn't be officially recorded, a service record that placed her among the most elite shooters in the American military establishment, male or female. And then abruptly, she had requested transfer back to conventional corpsman duties. The file included a brief incident report. During her final mission, her spotter, a male Special Forces operator, had been killed by enemy fire while she was taking a shot. She had completed the mission, eliminating the target, then single-handedly extracted her spotter's body under fire before calling for evacuation. She had been offered medals, offered continued service in the program with increased responsibility. She had declined everything and requested assignment to the most dangerous conventional posting available: forward medical duties with Marine combat units. The psychological evaluation following her transfer request was marked pending, with a note that she had attended the minimum required counseling sessions before being cleared for deployment. The evaluating psychiatrist had noted survivor guilt, possible PTSD, high functioning but potentially vulnerable under sustained stress. The recommendation had been for continued monitoring and counseling. There was no indication she had ever followed up with counseling. Barrett closed the file and sat in silence for several minutes. Now he understood the composure under pressure, the tactical awareness, the way she moved through dangerous situations with a calm that seemed almost supernatural. She had been trained at the highest levels of military operational art, had been tested in circumstances that would break most people, and she had survived by learning to compartmentalize, to function despite trauma, to keep moving forward, because stopping meant confronting things she wasn't ready to face. She was an asset, an incredibly skilled operator who could provide capabilities most corpsmen couldn't dream of. But she was also a potential liability, because people who ran from their trauma instead of processing it didn't stop running. They just ran faster and harder until something broke. Barrett made a decision. He would keep this information to himself for now. Sloan had earned her position on this team through her demonstrated competence as a corpsman. Her classified past was just that past, Unless and until circumstances required revealing it, he would let her continue serving in the role she had chosen. But he would watch her carefully, and he would be ready to intervene if the weight she was carrying started to affect her ability to function. The team deployment orders came down 6 weeks after Sloan joined SEAL Team 3. They were heading to Afghanistan for a 3-month rotation, conducting training and advisory missions with Afghan National Army units. The official mission was capacity building and partnership development. The unofficial mission was counterterrorism operations against high-value targets that the Afghan forces weren't equipped to handle. The team spent 2 weeks preparing for deployment. Equipment was inspected and packed. Intelligence briefings covered the current threat environment. Medical supplies were requisitioned and organized. Sloan threw herself into the preparation with focused intensity, grateful for work that kept her mind occupied. Master Chief Sullivan pulled her aside the day before they flew out. "Doc, got a minute?" They walked to a quiet area away from the bustle of pre-deployment activity. Sullivan looked at her with an expression that suggested he was about to say something she wouldn't want to hear. "I don't know your whole story," he began carefully. "Don't need to know it. But I've been doing this long enough to recognize when someone's carrying weight they don't talk about. You've got something from your previous deployments that you're still processing. I'm not asking you to tell me about it. I'm just asking you to be honest with yourself about whether you're ready to go back down range." Sloan's jaw tightened, but her voice remained steady. "I'm ready, Master Chief. I've been back 3 times already. I know how to do this." "I'm sure you do, but there's a difference between knowing how to do something and being in the right headspace to do it sustainably." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "If things get complicated out there, I need to know that you're going to keep your head straight, that you're not going to make decisions based on trying to fix something that happened before instead of dealing with what's happening now. I'm a professional, Master Chief. I do my job regardless of my personal issues." "I know you do. That's what worries me. Because professionals who ignore their personal issues long enough eventually find themselves in situations where those issues can't be ignored anymore." Sullivan's voice carried genuine concern rather than judgment. "Just promise me that if you start to feel overwhelmed, you'll reach out. To me, to Commander Barrett, to someone. Because this team needs you functional, not martyred." Sloan nodded, though privately she had no intention of reaching out if things got difficult. She had learned years ago that talking about trauma didn't make it hurt less. It just made it more real. Better to keep moving, keep working, keep focusing on the next mission until the past faded into something manageable. "I appreciate your concern, Master Chief. I'll be fine." Sullivan studied her for another moment, then nodded. "All right, Doc. Let's get this team deployed and bring everyone home safely." As he walked away, Sloan stood alone with her thoughts. She understood what Sullivan was trying to tell her. Understood that she was approaching burnout, that she was using work to avoid processing trauma, that her coping mechanisms were unsustainable. But understanding something intellectually and being able to change it emotionally were 2 different things. She had made a promise to herself 3 years ago, kneeling in the dirt of a valley in Afghanistan, surrounded by 9 bodies that she hadn't been able to save. She had promised that every moment of her life from that day forward would count for something, would mean something, would justify her survival when they hadn't survived. If that meant running herself into the ground, if that meant ignoring her own needs in service of others, if that meant never fully confronting the guilt and grief that threatened to overwhelm her whenever she stopped moving, well, that seemed like a small price to pay. She pushed those thoughts aside and returned to her equipment checks. There was work to be done, a deployment to prepare for, a team depending on her to keep them alive. The rest could wait. It would have to wait. Because Sloan Callahan had learned long ago that the only way to survive carrying an unbearable weight was to never ever put it down. The moment you set it aside was the moment it would crush you, so you kept carrying it. You kept moving. You kept functioning. Until eventually you forgot what it felt like to be anything other than a person carrying weight. The desert outside Kandahar looked exactly like Sloan remembered. Tan earth stretching to distant mountains punctuated by mud brick compounds and irrigation ditches that created the only green in an otherwise monochrome landscape. The heat shimmered off the ground in waves that distorted distance perception. The air tasted of dust and diesel fuel, and something else, a particular quality of danger that combat zones carried like a signature scent. SEAL Team 3 had been in country for 5 weeks, operating out of a forward operating base that housed a mix of American Special Operations Forces and Afghan National Army units. Their missions had followed a predictable pattern training exercises with ANA troops during the day, intelligence gathering and target development at night. The pace was demanding but not overwhelming. A sustainable operational tempo that allowed the team to maintain alertness without burning out. Sloan had settled into her role seamlessly. She conducted daily sick calls for both American and Afghan personnel, maintained the team's medical supplies, and participated in their physical training and equipment maintenance routines. She ate with the team, slept in the same plywood barracks, and slowly became integrated into their collective culture in a way that felt both natural and hard-won. The team had stopped viewing her as the female corpsman and started viewing her as simply Doc. It was a small shift in terminology that reflected a larger shift in acceptance. She had proven herself competent, professional, and unflappable. When things got complicated, she stayed calm. When people needed medical attention, she provided it efficiently. When the team needed someone to handle the unglamorous support tasks that kept them functional, she did it without complaint. But Master Chief Sullivan continued to watch her with particular attention. He noticed things that others missed. The way her hands would unconsciously drift toward weapons during weapons maintenance, as if checking familiar equipment she wasn't supposed to be familiar with. The way her eyes tracked movement across the training range with an assessment that went beyond medical interest. The way she positioned herself during briefings, always with clear sight lines to exits and angles that would provide tactical advantage if something went wrong. She was more than she appeared to be. Sullivan was certain of it, but he couldn't figure out exactly what that more was, and Commander Barrett hadn't shared anything from her classified service record. The mission that would change everything came down on a Wednesday morning in late June. Intelligence had located a high-value target in a compound approximately 40 miles northwest of their FOB. The target was a Taliban commander responsible for multiple IED attacks against coalition forces. He was meeting with subordinates to plan an operation targeting a nearby Afghan government facility. The mission was straightforward on paper. Insert before dawn, conduct reconnaissance, confirm target identification, and if authorized, eliminate the target and any immediate threats. Extract before local security forces could respond. Standard direct action mission for an experienced SEAL team. The team briefing included the usual elements: intelligence summaries, terrain analysis, insertion and extraction plans, contingency protocols. Sloan attended as she always did, taking notes on medical considerations and preparing her aid kit for potential casualties. Weather forecast shows clear skies, low winds, Commander Barrett said, pointing to a map display. Insertion by helicopter 3 kilometers from target compound. We'll move in on foot, establish overwatch positions here and here. He indicated ridgelines overlooking the target. Kowalski, you'll set up with Ramirez on the south ridge for primary observation and fires. Matthews and Hayes will take the north position for security and secondary observation. Rules of engagement, Matthews asked. Positive identification required for primary target. Weapons free for armed hostiles who present immediate threat. Minimize civilian exposure. We want clean intel and clean execution. Medical considerations. Barrett turned to Sloan. She had already thought through the likely scenarios. Nearest trauma facility is 90 minutes by air. We'll be outside the golden hour for any critical casualties, so field stabilization is essential. I'll carry extra blood clotting agents and airway equipment. If someone goes down critical, we need to establish LZ for immediate CAS evac rather than attempting ground evacuation. Good copy. Any other questions? The room was quiet. Professional soldiers preparing for a mission they had conducted dozens of times before. The calm before insertion that came from knowing exactly what needed to happen and trusting that everyone would execute their piece of the plan. What no one anticipated was the Taliban planning session being a trap. They inserted smoothly under darkness, the helicopter dropping them in a wadi that provided cover from observation. The team moved through the pre-dawn darkness with night vision equipment, navigating the broken terrain toward their objective. Sloan moved in the middle of the patrol column, her medical rig on her back and her M4 carbine held ready. The first hint of trouble came when they were still 2 kilometers from the target compound. Master Chief Sullivan, leading the patrol, held up a fist, the hand signal for halt. The team froze in place, each member scanning their assigned sector, while Sullivan consulted his GPS and compared it to the satellite imagery on his tablet. "Boss," he whispered into his radio, "I've got fresh tracks. Multiple individuals, military-age males, moving perpendicular to our route of advance within the last 4 hours." Barrett moved up to Sullivan's position and examined the signs. Footprints in the dust, disturbed rocks, broken vegetation. A group of at least 8 to 10 people had moved through this area recently, and their route suggested they were patrolling rather than traveling to a specific destination. "Could be locals moving between villages," Matthews suggested quietly. "At 0300, Sullivan shook his head. "This is a patrol. Question is whether they're local security or hostile forces." Barrett made a decision. We continue to objective but increase security posture. Sullivan take point with thermal optics. Matthews bring up rear security. Everyone stay sharp. They continued moving, but the entire team's alertness had increased. What had been a routine movement through familiar terrain types now carried an edge of uncertainty. Were they walking into something more complicated than anticipated? They established their overwatch positions as planned. Kowalski and Ramirez with their precision rifles on the south ridge, Matthews and Hayes on the north ridge for security, Barrett, Sullivan, and 4 others in a central position that would allow them to respond to either flank, and Sloan positioned behind a rock formation that provided cover while giving her line of sight to both overwatch elements. Dawn broke slowly, the sun rising over distant mountains and painting the desert in shades of orange and gold. The target compound came into view as the light increased, a typical Afghan structure with high walls surrounding multiple buildings arranged around a central courtyard. "I've got movement," Kowalski reported quietly over the radio. 5 military-age males in the courtyard, armed with AK variants. Positive ID on primary target. He's the one in the gray Dashdasha talking on a cell phone. Barrett watched through his spotting scope. Confirm primary target. Stand by for authorization. The team waited while Barrett contacted their Tactical Operations Center. The radio exchange was brief and professional. Clearance granted for the primary target. Minimize civilian casualties. Clear to engage on commander's authority. Kowalski, you have authorization for BAM. The world exploded. The ambush was perfectly executed. Taliban fighters who had been hidden in the spider holes and concealed positions opened fire simultaneously from 3 sides. Machine gun fire raked the ridgelines where the Overwatch teams were positioned. RPG rounds detonated against rocks near the central element. What had appeared to be a routine compound with a single high-value target revealed itself to be a carefully prepared kill zone. The intelligence had been a setup. The Taliban commander hadn't been planning an operation. He had been bait positioned to draw American forces into an ambush against an enemy who knew exactly where they would establish observation positions. Contact left, contact right, multiple hostiles with crew-served weapons. The radio exploded with urgent transmissions as the team responded to the coordinated attack. Kowalski and Ramirez were pinned down on their ridge, unable to move without exposing themselves to machine gun fire from a position they hadn't known existed. Matthews and Hayes were taking accurate fire from another hidden position. The central element was caught in a crossfire that prevented movement in any direction. And then Ramirez screamed, "I'm hit. Right shoulder, can't move my arm." Sloan's training took over instantly. She assessed the tactical situation with automatic precision. Ramirez was approximately 100 meters from her position, exposed to enemy fire, with a potentially life-threatening wound. Standard procedure was to wait for the team to suppress enemy fire before moving to treat casualties. But standard procedure assumed you had the capability to suppress enemy fire. Right now, they were pinned down and outgunned. "Doc, stay in cover," Barrett ordered over the radio. "We need to establish fire superiority before Ramirez talk to me," Sloan cut across the transmission. "Where's the hit? Are you still in the fight?" "Right behind shoulder through and through. I can't work the rifle," which meant their primary precision shooter was combat ineffective. Their ability to engage targets at range had just been eliminated at the moment they needed it most. Sloan made a calculation based on factors she shouldn't have been capable of calculating. Enemy gun position relative to Ramirez's location, angles of fire, dead space created by terrain features, estimated range to hostile forces, wind speed and direction. "Kowalski," she transmitted, her voice absolutely calm despite the chaos erupting around them. "Can you reach Ramirez's rifle?" "Negative, it's 3 meters outside our cover, and we're taking accurate fire." The Taliban fighters had them boxed in. The longer this went on, the more likely they were to take additional casualties. Someone needed to shift the tactical balance. Someone needed to eliminate the machine gun position that was keeping their Overwatch team pinned down. Commander Barrett was coordinating fire and movement, trying to establish angles that would allow them to suppress the enemy positions. Master Chief Sullivan was directing the central element's security. Everyone was doing their job exactly right, according to their training and experience. But none of them could take the 800-meter shot that would eliminate the machine gun position threatening to kill Ramirez and Kowalski. Sloan Callahan could. She had promised herself 3 years ago that she would never pick up a precision rifle again. Had promised her mother in a phone call from a hospital bed after her spotter died that she was done with that life. Had requested transfer to conventional medical duties specifically to get away from the kind of decision she was about to make. But 9 Marines had died because she hadn't been able to save them. She carried that weight every day. and she would be damned if she was going to let more people die when she had the skills to prevent it. Barrett, she transmitted her voice carrying an edge of command that made him pause mid-sentence. I can take that shot. Doc, what are you? The machine gun position pinning down Kowalski. 820 meters elevated position, 2 shooters. I can eliminate it. There was a moment of stunned silence on the radio. Then Barrett's voice tight with confusion and urgency. Doc, you're a corpsman, not... I'm a lot of things, sir. Right now, I'm the only person on this team who can make that shot. Ramirez's rifle is an M110 with a Leupold Mark IV scope. I'm familiar with the system. Give me authorization and I'll solve this problem. Master Chief Sullivan's voice cut in. Boss, I don't know what the hell is happening here, but if Doc says she can make that shot, I believe her. Barrett made the kind of decision that combat leadership required, trusting his people, even when he didn't fully understand the situation. Kowalski, can you get that rifle to Doc? If she's serious about this, I can get it to the edge of our cover, but she'll have to move through the open to retrieve it. I'm moving. Sloan was already stripping off her medical rig, reducing her profile and weight. She kept her sidearm and grabbed extra magazines for the M110. Kowalski, on my mark, you and Barrett put suppressing fire on that machine gun position. 3-second burst. I'll move during the 3rd second. She didn't wait for acknowledgement. She positioned herself at the edge of her cover, visualizing the route to Kowalski's position. 15 meters of open ground. 3 seconds of suppressing fire. She would be exposed, but moving fast enough that hitting her would require luck more than skill. Mark. The suppressing fire opened up Barrett's element, and Kowalski both engaging the machine gun position with short, controlled bursts. Sloan exploded from her cover in a sprint, her boots finding purchase on the rocky ground with a sureness born from years of moving through similar terrain. She covered the distance in just under 4 seconds, diving into the cover where Kowalski and Ramirez were sheltering. Jesus Christ, Kowalski breathed, staring at her. Who the hell are you? Sloan ignored the question and turned her attention to Ramirez first. The shoulder wound was bleeding, but not arterial. She applied a quick pressure dressing and administered a dose of pain medication from the small kit she had brought. You're going to be fine. Stay in cover and keep pressure on this. Then she picked up the M110 rifle. The weapon felt familiar in her hands despite 3 years of deliberate distance from it. Muscle memory took over, checking the chamber, verifying the magazine was seated, adjusting the scope settings for range and conditions. Her hands moved with automatic precision through steps she had practiced thousands of times. She positioned herself at the edge of the rock outcropping, settling into a shooting stance that provided stability while minimizing her exposure. The machine gun position was visible through the scope, 2 Taliban fighters behind a reinforced position with a PKM machine gun that was tearing chunks out of the rocks around them. Range 820 meters. Wind approximately 8 miles per hour from left to right. Elevation change minimal. Temperature already climbing past 90 degrees, but not enough to significantly affect ballistics. Sloan's breathing slowed, automatically falling into the rhythm she had been taught years ago. 4 seconds in, 7 seconds hold, 8 seconds out. Her heart rate dropped. The chaos of the firefight around her faded into background noise. The world narrowed to the scope picture and the calculations running through her mind. First shot, aim point, center mass on the primary shooter. Adjust 6 inches left for wind. Slight elevation, compensation for range. Trigger squeeze on the exhale between heartbeats. She fired. The recoil was exactly what she remembered. The scope picture bounced, and she worked the bolt smoothly, chambering another round while reacquiring the target. The first Taliban fighter was still there. She had missed. The miss was a shock to her system. 3 years ago, she had been one of the most accurate shooters in her unit. 47 confirmed eliminations without a single miss on a critical target. But that had been 3 years ago. Muscle memory was one thing. Actual current proficiency was something else. She forced the panic down and made rapid corrections. The miss had been high and right. She had overcompensated for wind and underestimated bullet drop at this range. Adjust lower. Less wind compensation. Trust the training. Second shot. The Taliban fighter went down. The machine gun fell silent. Holy shit, Kowalski whispered. Doc just made an 800-meter cold bore shot under fire. But there was no time to process what had just happened. The ambush was still ongoing. The Taliban fighters were repositioning, bringing more weapons to bear. The team was still in danger. Barrett, Sloan transmitted, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Primary machine gun eliminated, but we've got more problems. I count at least 40 hostiles, and they're maneuvering to flank our position. Copy that, Doc, and we're going to have a serious conversation about your skill set when we get back. But right now, I need you to keep doing what you're doing. Can you provide precision overwatch for the team? Could she 3 years ago? Absolutely. Now, with one miss and one hit having proven to herself that she had lost some edge during her time away from this role, but Ramirez was wounded. Kowalski was a competent shooter, but not trained for the kind of precision work this situation demanded. And the team was pinned down by an enemy that had them outgunned and outpositioned. Affirmative, sir. I can do it. For the next 40 minutes, Sloan Callahan did something she had sworn she would never do again. She fought as a sniper, not a corpsman who happened to be holding a rifle, but a trained precision shooter conducting military operations at extended range. She eliminated a spotter who was directing mortar fire toward the team's position, engaged two fighters who were attempting to flank Matthews and Hayes, suppressed an RPG team that was lining up a shot on Barrett's element. Each shot was deliberate, calculated, executed with the cold efficiency that had made her effective in her previous role. And each shot felt like breaking the promise she had made, felt like becoming the person she had tried to leave behind. Felt like admitting that maybe you couldn't escape who you were no matter how hard you tried to become someone else. By the time helicopter gunships arrived to provide close air support and suppress the remaining Taliban fighters, Sloan had fired 19 rounds and scored 16 hits at ranges between 600 and 1,000 meters. The team extracted with only one serious casualty, Ramirez's shoulder wound, which would require surgery but wasn't life-threatening. They flew back to base in stunned silence. Every member of the team was processing what had just happened. Their corpsman, the quiet professional medical technician who had been with them for 2 months, had just performed as an elite precision shooter under combat conditions that would challenge the most experienced snipers. When they landed and began offloading equipment, Kowalski approached Sloan with a mixture of awe and confusion on his face. "Doc, what the hell just happened out there?" Sloan was securing the M110 rifle, her movements mechanical and precise. "I did what needed to be done to bring everyone home alive." "That's not an answer. That was some seriously high-level shooting. Where did you learn it?" "Gunny, with all due respect, I need to check on Ramirez and make sure he gets proper treatment. We can talk about this later." She walked away before he could press further, but she knew the conversation was only postponed. "You didn't demonstrate that level of capability and then disappear back into anonymity." The team had questions. Commander Barrett definitely had questions, and she was going to have to provide answers. Master Chief Sullivan found her 30 minutes later in the medical facility, finishing paperwork on Ramirez's treatment. The wounded SEAL was already in surgery, his shoulder being repaired by the base surgeon. The prognosis was good, full recovery, expected within 6 months. "Doc, Commander wants to see you in the operations center. Bring your service record." Sloan nodded, knowing exactly what was coming. The classified file that Barrett had requested months ago was about to become very relevant to this conversation. Commander Barrett's office in the operations center was a plywood box with a desk, 2 chairs, and a wall covered in maps and intelligence reports. He was standing when Sloan entered, and his expression was carefully neutral. "Sit down, Petty Officer Callahan." She sat, her posture military perfect, despite the exhaustion creeping through her system. Combat always left her drained, but it was a different kind of tired than the everyday fatigue of training. This was the tiredness that came from making life and death decisions under pressure. "So," Barrett began, leaning against his desk with his arms crossed. "I've had your classified service record for about 6 weeks. I've been keeping it to myself because I figured what you did before joining this team was your business unless it affected your current duties." He paused, letting that hang in the air. "Today, what you did before became very relevant to your current duties. So I think it's time we had an honest conversation about exactly who Sloan Callahan is and what capabilities you bring to this team." "Sir, I'm a corpsman. I keep people alive. That's my primary function, and—" "Sloan?" Barrett's use of her first name stopped her mid-sentence. "You just made 16 hits out of 19 shots at extended range under combat stress. You demonstrated tactical awareness and shooting skills that put you in the top percentile of American military snipers. And based on your classified record, you were part of a CIA/JSOC program that deployed female operators in counterterrorism roles." He pulled out her file and opened it to a specific page. 47 confirmed eliminations over 18 months, 0 failed missions. Multiple high-value targets eliminated in operations that remain classified. Specialist in urban and rural precision shooting, trained by some of the best instructors in JSOC. Barrett closed the file and looked at her directly. "Why did you leave that program?" Sloan was quiet for a long moment. The question wasn't unexpected, But it still hit hard because answering it meant confronting things she had spent 3 years trying to avoid confronting. My spotter was killed during my last mission, she said finally, her voice carefully controlled. We were conducting reconnaissance on a high-value target in Syria. I was positioned for a shot when we took unexpected fire from a position we hadn't identified. Marcus, my spotter, pushed me out of the line of fire and took the round that would have hit me. She could still see it, could still hear the sound of the bullet impact and Marcus's sharp intake of breath, could still feel the weight of his body armor as she dragged him to cover. I completed the mission, eliminated the target, and extracted Marcus's body. But afterward, I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't take shots knowing that someone else was depending on me to keep them safe while I was focused on the target. Couldn't trust myself to make the right decisions when making decisions meant someone might die. So you requested transfer to combat medicine. I requested transfer to something where my job was saving people instead of killing them, where success meant everyone came home instead of me coming home and someone else didn't. Barrett processed this information, understanding the psychology, even if he didn't entirely agree with the logic. And today when you picked up that rifle, what were you thinking? I was thinking that Ramirez was wounded, Kowalski was pinned down, and this team was about to take casualties because we didn't have the capability to engage threats at precision range. Sloan met his eyes directly. I was thinking that I had skills that could solve that problem and letting people die because I was afraid to use those skills would make me responsible for their deaths. Even though using those skills meant becoming the person you were trying not to be anymore. Yes, sir, even though. Barrett stood and walked to the map wall, studying the terrain around their current position. When he spoke again, his voice carried a tone of command decision rather than conversation. Sloan, I'm not going to order you to operate as a sniper. That's not your assigned role, and I respect your decision to leave that life behind. But what happened today demonstrated something important. This team is more effective when we can leverage all available capabilities. Sometimes that means you're our corpsman. Sometimes it might mean you're our precision shooter. Most of the time it means you're both. He turned to face her. I'm not asking you to choose between being a medic and being a warrior. I'm suggesting that maybe you don't have to choose. Maybe the best way to honor your spotter's memory isn't to stop doing what you were trained to do. Maybe it's to use all your skills, medical and tactical, to make sure more people come home alive. Sloan sat with that for a moment. The idea of integration rather than separation, of accepting that she could be both things, healer and warrior, without betraying either role. It was a perspective she hadn't considered before because the pain of Marcus's death had made her see those roles as mutually exclusive. Sir, I'm not sure I can trust myself in that role anymore. Today I missed my first shot. 3 years ago I never would have missed. 3 years ago you were actively training in that skill set. Today you made one adjustment and hit your second shot under combat stress while treating a wounded teammate. That's not failure, Sloan. That's adaptation. Barrett's voice carried conviction. But more importantly, you chose to take that shot, chose to use those skills despite your personal reservations because it was necessary to protect this team. That's exactly the kind of judgment I need in someone who's going to operate in both capacities. He pulled out a form and signed it, then handed it to her. This is authorization for you to be issued precision rifle equipment and ammunition. You'll maintain your primary duties as team corpsman, but you'll also be qualified for precision overwatch when tactical situations require it. You don't have to decide right now whether you're comfortable with this, but I need you to have the option available so that if circumstances like today happen again, you're not improvising with borrowed equipment. Sloan took the form, staring at it like it was a snake that might bite. This was the crossroads. She could refuse this assignment, insist on remaining purely in a medical role, maintain the separation she had tried to build between who she had been and who she was trying to become. Or she could accept that maybe separation was impossible, that maybe the skills she carried were part of who she was, and denying them meant denying a piece of herself that could save lives. I'll do it, she said quietly. But sir, I need you to understand something. I left that program because I couldn't handle the weight of taking lives anymore. If I'm going to do this, it has to be in service of saving lives. Medical first, precision shooting only when it's the only way to protect the team. Agreed, your primary function remains combat medicine. Precision shooting is a secondary capability we'll leverage only when necessary. Barrett extended his hand. And Sloan, for what it's worth, what you did today probably saved multiple lives, including your own, since that machine gun would have eventually found all of our positions. You made a hard choice and executed it professionally. That's all anyone can ask. She shook his hand, though the weight settling onto her shoulders felt heavier than the physical gear she carried. She had just agreed to step back into a role she had sworn to leave behind. But maybe Barrett was right. Maybe there was a way to integrate these pieces of herself instead of choosing between them. Maybe she could be both healer and warrior without betraying either. She left the operations center and walked through the base toward her barracks, her mind churning through the implications of what had just happened. Word had already spread through the special operations community on base. The SEALs were talking about their corpsman, who had turned out to be an elite shooter. People were looking at her differently now, with a mixture of respect and curiosity that made her uncomfortable. Master Chief Sullivan intercepted her near the dining facility. "Got a minute, Doc?" They found a quiet spot away from the main flow of personnel. Sullivan studied her with those knowing eyes that seemed to see more than most people. "I've been watching you since you joined this team," he said without preamble. "Noticed things that didn't quite add up. The way you moved, the way you assessed situations, the muscle memory with weapons that corpsmen don't usually have." He paused, then continued. "I didn't know your specific background, but I knew you were carrying something from your past that you weren't talking about. And now I understand why. You weren't just running from trauma, you were running from yourself." Sloan looked away, uncomfortable with how accurately he had read her. "Here's what I'm going to tell you, and I want you to really hear this. What you did today was necessary. It was professional. It saved lives. But that doesn't mean you have to be okay with it. You can do hard things and still struggle with having done them. That's not weakness. That's being human. Master Chief, I appreciate—" "I'm not done." His voice was firm but kind. "You've been carrying weight from whatever happened in your previous assignment for 3 years. You've been using medical work as penance, trying to make up for whatever you think you did wrong. But Sloan, you can't outrun guilt by exhausting yourself in service. You can only outrun it by facing it and making peace with it." He put a hand on her shoulder. "This team is lucky to have you, all of you. The corpsman who keeps us healthy and the operator who can provide precision fires when we need it. But we also need you to be whole, not broken and held together by force of will, actually whole. And that means dealing with your past instead of just running from it." Sloan felt tears threatening and pushed them back with practiced control. "I don't know how to do that, Master Chief. I don't know how to be okay with what happened. With the fact that Marcus died protecting me. With the fact that I kept taking shots after he was gone. With the fact that I'm good at killing people when all I want to be is someone who saves them. Then maybe it's time to find someone who can help you figure that out. Someone trained in helping operators process trauma and complicated feelings about their work. Because what you're doing right now, compartmentalizing and pushing forward and ignoring the weight you're carrying, that's not sustainable. Eventually, something breaks." He was right. Sloan knew he was right. But knowing something intellectually and being able to act on it emotionally were different things. She had been running for 3 years. Stopping felt impossible. "I'll think about it," she said, which they both knew was code for "I'm not ready to deal with this yet." Sullivan nodded, accepting that he had pushed as far as he could for now. "Fair enough. But Doc, remember, asking for help isn't weakness. It's tactical wisdom. You can't complete the mission if you're combat ineffective, and right now your psychological state is compromising your long-term operational capacity." He walked away, leaving Sloan standing alone with thoughts that refused to quiet no matter how hard she tried to push them down. That night, lying in her bunk with the sounds of the FOB carrying through the plywood walls, Sloan Callahan forced herself to confront a truth she had been avoiding for 3 years. She was broken. Not in the way that prevented her from functioning. She could still do her job, could still provide medical care, and apparently could still take precision shots when necessary. But broken in the way that meant she was held together by willpower and determination rather than actually being healed. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop running and start healing. But not yet. Not while they were deployed. Not while the team needed her to be functional. She would get through this rotation. Would prove to herself and everyone else that she could integrate these dual roles without falling apart. Would demonstrate that she could be both corpsman and sniper without losing herself in either identity. And then when they got back home, maybe she would find someone to talk to. Someone who could help her process the weight she had been carrying alone for so long. Maybe. Until then, she would do what she had always done. Keep moving, keep working, keep pushing forward. Because stopping meant confronting all the things she wasn't ready to confront. And Sloan Callahan had learned long ago that survival meant never stopping long enough to let the past catch up with you. The call came at 04:30 on a Thursday morning, 2 weeks after the ambush that had revealed Sloan's hidden capabilities to SEAL Team 3. The Tactical Operations Center transmitted an urgent request for immediate response mass casualty incident at a coalition checkpoint 15 kilometers north of their position. IED strike targeting a convoy. Multiple wounded. Local medical facilities overwhelmed. Commander Barrett assembled the team in under 5 minutes. They loaded into 2 vehicles with full medical supplies, Sloan riding in the lead vehicle with her expanded aid kit that now included equipment for treating up to 12 casualties simultaneously. The scene they arrived at was controlled chaos. The IED had struck the center vehicle of a 3-vehicle Marine convoy, killing 2 Marines instantly and wounding 10 others with varying degrees of severity. Local Afghan forces had secured the area, but the wounded were scattered across 50 meters of highway, with minimal medical care being provided. Sloan assessed the situation with rapid precision as she exited the vehicle. 3 immediate casualties lying motionless, likely already beyond saving. 4 casualties with obvious severe trauma requiring immediate intervention. 3 casualties ambulatory but wounded and probably in shock. The math was brutal and simple. Save who you can save triage. The rest accept that you can't save everyone. Kowalski-Hayes get the 3 immediate casualties into one location. If they're still viable, I'll stabilize them once I've secured the other 7. Sloan's voice carried command authority that came from years of making these decisions. Barrett, I need you coordinating evacuation birds. We need 2 CASVAC helicopters here in 20 minutes or we're going to lose people. She moved to the nearest severely wounded Marine, a young corporal with a traumatic amputation of his left leg below the knee and severe bleeding from shrapnel wounds in his abdomen, the kind of injury that could kill in minutes without proper intervention. Sloan dropped to her knees beside him, her hands already moving through practice procedures. Tourniquet high on the thigh tightened until bleeding stopped. Quick assessment of the abdominal wounds penetrating trauma, likely hollow organ injury, but no active arterial bleeding. I've access established in his right arm fluids, running wide open to combat shock. Stay with me, Marine. I've got you. You're going to make it home. Her voice was calm, professional, exactly what the wounded man needed to hear while his world was falling apart. She spent 4 minutes on him, enough to stabilize his immediate life threats before moving to the next casualty. A female lance corporal with a sucking chest wound and a compound fracture of her right arm. Chest seal applied, arm splinted, another IV started. 3 minutes and she was stable enough to survive until evacuation. The pattern continued. Move, assess, treat, critical threats, stabilize, move to next casualty. Sloan worked with mechanical efficiency that came from training and experience, but underneath that efficiency was a growing awareness that they had another problem. Taliban fighters were using the attack as an opportunity to maneuver into position for a follow-up strike. She could see them through breaks in the terrain, military-age males with weapons moving through a compound about 600 meters from the highway. They were positioning a PKM machine gun and what looked like an 82mm mortar. Barrett, she transmitted while continuing to work on her 5th casualty. We've got hostiles setting up crew-served weapons at the compound to our northeast, 600 meters out. If they get that mortar operational, this evacuation site becomes a kill zone. Barrett's response was immediate. Copy that. Sullivan, can you engage from our current position? Negative, sir. I've got no angle on that compound from here. Doc, can you take that shot? The question carried weight beyond its simple words. Barrett was asking whether she could transition from medical care to precision shooting, whether she could be both things at once. Sloan finished applying a pressure dressing to the casualty. She was treating a sergeant with shrapnel wounds in his legs that weren't immediately life-threatening but needed attention. She made a split-second calculation. 5 casualties stabilized, 3 more requiring immediate care. But if that mortar started firing, everyone at this location was at risk. I can take it, but I need someone to take over medical care while I'm on the rifle. Matthews, you're up. You've got combat lifesaver training. Yes, sir, I can handle basic trauma care. Sloan gave Matthews rapid instructions on the remaining casualties, what to prioritize, what could wait, when to call her back if something became critical. Then she retrieved her precision rifle from the vehicle and moved to a position that provided both cover and a clear line of sight to the enemy compound. The Taliban fighters were working quickly, setting up their weapons with practiced efficiency. They knew they had a limited window before American air support arrived or before the evacuation was complete. Get the mortar operational, drop a few rounds into the casualty collection point, maximize American casualties, and withdraw before overwhelming force could respond. Sloan settled into her shooting position, the rifle butt pressed firmly against her shoulder. 600 meters, slight uphill angle, wind approximately 10 miles per hour from right to left. 2 primary targets, the mortar team leader and the machine gunner. She controlled her breathing, let her heart rate slow, and aligned the crosshairs on her first target. The Taliban fighter was crouched over the mortar, adjusting its elevation. She had perhaps 30 seconds before he would be ready to fire. First shot. The fighter dropped his body going limp as the 7.62mm round found its target's center mass. The other Taliban fighters immediately scattered seeking cover, but the machine gunner stayed at his weapon trying to bring it to bear on the American position. Sloan worked the bolt chambered another round reacquired her target. Second shot, the machine gunner fell. 2 hostiles down, she reported calmly. Remaining fighters are seeking cover. Stand by my... She waited patient and still knowing that panic often caused people to make mistakes. Sure enough, after 30 seconds, one of the Taliban fighters broke cover and ran toward a different position. He made it 3 steps before Sloan's third shot ended his movement. The remaining fighters went to ground and stayed there, clearly deciding that exposing themselves to engage an American sniper was suicidal. The threat was neutralized. Clear, Sloan transmitted. Hostiles are no longer in immediate danger, returning to medical duties. She slung the rifle across her back and returned to the casualty collection point. Matthews had done well. He had kept the most critical casualties stable and had properly triaged the others. But there was still work to be done. Sloan moved between patients with renewed focus, adjusting IVs, checking bandages, administering pain medication where appropriate. She was a corpsman again, her brief stint as a sniper already compartmentalized and set aside. The evacuation helicopters arrived 18 minutes after Barrett's initial call. Sloan coordinated the loading, ensuring the most critical casualties were prioritized and that each bird had proper documentation on what treatments had been provided. She flew out with the first helicopter, continuing care during the 20-minute flight to the nearest surgical facility. All 12 casualties survived. 2 required extensive surgery and months of recovery, but they lived. And the Marines who had witnessed Sloan's performance, both as a medic saving lives and as a sniper protecting the evacuation site, spread the word through the theater of operations. The Navy corpsman who could do both, who could save your life with medical skill and protect your life with precision fire, who moved between roles with a seamlessness that defied the usual categorizations. Back at the FOB that evening, Sloan filed her medical reports and cleaned her weapon with equal attention to detail. Master Chief Sullivan found her in the armory, methodically working through the rifle maintenance procedures. Hell of a day, Doc. Just another Thursday in Afghanistan, Master Chief. Sullivan pulled up a chair and sat down watching her work. You know what impressed me most about today? It wasn't the shooting, though that was damn fine work. It was the way you transitioned between roles. You didn't hesitate, didn't seem conflicted. You just did what needed to be done. Sloan paused in her cleaning, considering that observation. I was too busy to be conflicted. People needed medical care. People needed protection. I provided both. There wasn't time for internal debate about identity or guilt or any of the other things I usually torture myself with. Maybe that's the lesson then. When you stop fighting against being both things and just accept it, the conflict disappears. Or maybe I'm just good at compartmentalizing. Sloan resumed cleaning the rifle. Compartmentalization isn't the same as integration, Master Chief. It's just putting things in boxes so you don't have to deal with them all at once. Fair point. Sullivan was quiet for a moment, then asked, You ever going to tell me what happened to your spotter? The one who died in your last mission before transferring to corpsman duties? The question hung in the air. Sloan's hand stilled on the rifle. His name was Marcus Brennan. He was a Green Beret, 32 years old, had a wife and a 2-year-old daughter back in North Carolina. Her voice was steady but quiet. We were conducting reconnaissance on a high-value target in Syria. I was positioned for a shot when we took fire from an unexpected position. Marcus pushed me out of the line of fire and took the round that would have hit me. She resumed cleaning the mechanical motion, providing an outlet for the emotion that was threatening to surface. I completed the mission, eliminated the target, extracted Marcus's body under fire, did everything by the book. And afterward, I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't take shots knowing that someone else was depending on me to keep them safe while I was focused downrange. So you became a corpsman. Figured if you saved enough lives, it would balance out the ones you took and the one you couldn't save. Something like that. Sloan finished reassembling the rifle and set it aside. But here's what I'm learning, Master Chief. It doesn't balance. You don't get to offset kills with saves like some kind of cosmic accounting system. You just carry both, the lives you took and the lives you saved. And eventually you either make peace with carrying that weight or it breaks you. And which one are you doing? I'm still figuring that out. The deployment continued for another 6 weeks. SEAL Team 3 conducted their assigned missions, training Afghan forces conducting counterterrorism operations providing security for coalition activities. And Sloan Callahan operated in her dual role with increasing comfort, serving primarily as the team corpsman, but providing precision fire support when tactical situations required it. She saved 4 lives during a complex ambush, treating casualties, while other team members provided security. She eliminated 3 enemy combatants who were positioning to attack a vulnerable convoy. She taught combat life-saving techniques to Afghan soldiers who had minimal medical training. The integration that Commander Barrett had suggested was happening not because Sloan had resolved her internal conflicts, but because operational necessity demanded it. She was too valuable in both roles to limit herself to just one. But the weight continued to accumulate. Every life saved added to her sense of purpose. Every shot taken added to her sense of burden. And underneath it all, the 9 Marines from that valley 3 years ago remained her constant companions, the reminder of when her best efforts hadn't been enough. They rotated back to California at the end of August. The team went through standard post-deployment procedures, equipment turn-in, medical checks, psychological screenings, administrative processing. Sloan passed everything with the same calm competence she brought to her operational duties. But Master Chief Sullivan knew better. He had watched her throughout the deployment, seen the way she drove herself harder than anyone else, noticed the careful control she maintained over her emotions. She was functioning at a high level, but it was the kind of high-level functioning that came from discipline rather than wellness. 3 days after they returned, Sullivan cornered Commander Barrett in his office. "Sir, we need to talk about Doc." "I'm listening." "She's exceptional at what she does. Saved multiple lives during this deployment, both medical and tactical. But she's running on fumes. She's compartmentalized her trauma so thoroughly that I'm not sure she even knows how damaged she is underneath all that professional competence." Barrett leaned back in his chair, considering. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that we mandate counseling. Not as punishment, but as a condition of continued service in this dual role. If she's going to operate as both corpsman and precision shooter, she needs to be psychologically sound in both capacities." She passed the psych screening. "Sir, with all due respect, those screenings are designed to catch people who are actively falling apart. Doc isn't falling apart. She's held together by sheer force of will. But that's not the same as being healthy." Barrett was silent for a long moment, then nodded. "Set up the counseling. Make it mandatory. 2 sessions per week for 6 weeks, then reassess. And Master Chief, make sure she understands this isn't about doubting her capability. It's about ensuring her long-term sustainability." Sullivan found Sloan the next morning during her usual early workout. She was running on the base track, maintaining a pace that would exhaust most people, but was apparently her version of meditation. He waited until she finished her cool-down before approaching. "Doc, got a minute?" They walked toward a quiet area near the training facilities. Sloan knew what was coming. You didn't get pulled aside by the Master Chief for casual conversation. "Commander Barrett and I have been discussing your performance during the deployment. You did outstanding work. Saved lives, neutralized threats, demonstrated exceptional capability in both your primary and secondary roles. I hear a but coming, Master Chief, but we're concerned about your long-term sustainability. The pace you're operating at, the weight you're carrying, the way you compartmentalize instead of processing, it's not sustainable. So we're making counseling mandatory. 2 sessions per week for 6 weeks with a psychologist who specializes in military trauma." Sloan's jaw tightened. "I'm functional, Master Chief. I'm doing my job. I don't need... This isn't negotiable. It's a condition of continued service in your dual role." Sullivan's voice was firm but not unkind. "Doc, you're one of the most capable people I've ever worked with, but capability isn't the same as wellness, and we need you to be both. And if I refuse the counseling, then you go back to being solely a corpsman. No more precision shooting, no more dual role operations, which would be a loss for this team, and I suspect a loss for you because you've started to integrate those roles in a way that's actually working." Sloan wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she was fine, that counseling was unnecessary, that she could continue functioning at this level indefinitely. But underneath that resistance was a quiet voice acknowledging that maybe Sullivan was right, that maybe she had been running for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be still, to be whole rather than just functional. "Okay," she said finally, "I'll do the counseling. But Master Chief, I'm not going to magically become okay with everything that's happened. Talking about trauma doesn't make it disappear." "No, but it might make it bearable. And bearable is better than the alternative." 6 months after returning from deployment, Sloan Callahan stood at a podium in the San Diego Convention Center, looking out at an audience of more than 200 people. Military medical personnel, combat arms instructors, special operations planners, and senior leadership from across the Defense Department. She had been invited to present at the Military Medicine and Tactics Integration Conference, a gathering focused on breaking down traditional barriers between different military specialties. Her topic, dual-role operations, medical and precision fire capabilities in the same operator. It had taken her months to agree to this presentation. Months of counseling sessions where she slowly, painfully worked through the guilt of Marcus's death and the 9 Marines from that valley. Months of learning that integration wasn't about resolving all conflict, but about accepting that she could hold seemingly contradictory truths simultaneously, that she could be a healer and a warrior, that she could save lives and take them, that she could be exceptional at her job while still carrying deep wounds. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. "My name is Petty Officer First Class Sloan Callahan. I serve as a corpsman with SEAL Team 3, and I'm here today to talk about something that makes a lot of people uncomfortable, the integration of medical and combat roles in the same individual." She clicked to her first slide, which showed statistics on combat casualty survival rates when medical care was provided within the first 5 minutes of injury. Traditional military doctrine separates roles. You're a corpsman or you're a shooter, a healer or a warrior. Medical personnel are generally prohibited from engaging in offensive combat operations under Geneva Convention protections. This separation makes sense in many contexts, but in modern special operations environments, rigid role separation can cost lives. The next slide showed a scenario diagram from her deployment, the IED attack, with Taliban fighters positioning for follow-up strikes. 6 months ago, my team responded to a mass casualty incident, 12 wounded Marines requiring immediate care. While I was treating casualties, enemy fighters began positioning crew-served weapons to attack our evacuation site. Traditional doctrine said I should focus on medical care and let other team members handle the enemy threat. But my team's sniper was wounded. No one else had the precision shooting capability to neutralize the threat at range. She clicked to the next slide. I transitioned from treating casualties to eliminating the enemy threat, then returned to medical care. All 12 casualties survived. The enemy attack was prevented, and I violated every traditional boundary between medical and combat roles in doing so. The audience was silent, processing what she had just described. Sloan could see varied reactions, some nodding and understanding, others looking uncomfortable with the implications. I'm not advocating for abandoning Geneva Convention protections or turning all medics into shooters. What I'm suggesting is that in specialized units conducting high-risk operations, we should consider expanding our definition of what's possible. That the skills required for precision shooting, emotional control, stress management, decision-making under pressure are many of the same skills required for combat medicine. She spent the next 30 minutes presenting data from her deployment analysis of similar situations from other conflicts and proposals for training programs that could develop dual-role capabilities in select personnel. The presentation was professional, well-researched, and challenging to conventional wisdom. During the question and answer session, a senior Army surgeon raised his hand. "Petty Officer Callahan, what you're describing is impressive, but I'm concerned about the psychological impact of asking medical personnel to take lives. How do you reconcile those roles internally?" It was the question she had been expecting and dreading, the one that didn't have a simple answer. "Sir, I'll be honest, it's hard. I struggled with it for years before accepting this dual role, and I still struggle with it sometimes. But here's what I've learned through counseling and experience. Humans are capable of holding complexity. We can be compassionate healers and effective warriors. We can value life deeply and still recognize that sometimes protecting lives requires taking them." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "The key isn't pretending there's no conflict. It's accepting that the conflict exists and developing frameworks to manage it. For me, that means medical care is always my primary function. Precision shooting only happens when it's necessary to protect lives and when no other option exists. That boundary helps me maintain clarity about my core identity and purpose." Before the surgeon could follow up, a voice called out from the back of the auditorium, "Ma'am, I have a question." Sloan looked up and froze. Standing in the rear of the room was a man in his late 20s wearing an EMT uniform. Tall, fit with dark hair and serious eyes that she would have recognized anywhere. Elijah McKenzie. One of the 3 survivors from that valley 3 years ago. The Marine she had kept alive through 18 hours of hell while 9 others died around them. "Do you remember me?" he asked quietly, but his voice carried in the silent auditorium. "Yes." Sloane's voice was barely above a whisper. I remember. Elijah walked down the center aisle toward the front of the room. Every person in the audience had gone completely still, sensing that they were witnessing something important. 3 years ago, you were a corpsman attached to my reconnaissance unit. We were ambushed in a valley outside Sangin, 18 hours under fire. 12 of us went into that valley. Only 3 came out. He reached the front and stood facing her. You kept me alive that day. When I begged you to stop when I said I was done, you wouldn't quit. You kept working on me even when supplies ran out, even when it seemed hopeless. Tears were streaming down Sloane's face now. All the professional composure she had maintained throughout her presentation breaking under the weight of this unexpected confrontation with her past. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry I couldn't save the others. I should have done more. I should have... Stop. Elijah's voice was gentle but firm. You saved my life. You saved Lieutenant Morrison's life. You did everything humanly possible under impossible circumstances. And the 9 we lost, they died because of enemy action, not because you failed. He pulled out his phone and held it up so she could see the screen. The photo showed a little girl with dark curly hair and a brilliant smile, maybe 3 years old, holding a stuffed animal and laughing at something off camera. This is my daughter. Her name is Sloane. His voice cracked. We named her after you, after the woman who gave me a future by refusing to let me die in that valley. The auditorium had gone completely silent, 200 military professionals watching a moment of profound healing unfold in front of them. After I recovered, I went to school, got my EMT certification. Now I work for the Baltimore Fire Department, providing emergency medical care. Elijah smiled. Because of you, I'm here. I have a daughter. I save lives. That ripple you created, it keeps spreading forward. He stepped closer and lowered his voice so only Sloane could hear. The 9 we lost would be proud of what you've built. This isn't just about that one day anymore. It's about every day since, every person you've helped, every life you've touched. That's the legacy they left through you. Sloane couldn't speak, could barely breathe. 3 years of guilt and grief and self-punishment were crashing against this unexpected absolution from someone who had been there, who had survived because of her efforts, who had built a life from the second chance she had given him. They embraced, and the applause that filled the auditorium wasn't the polite professional acknowledgement that usually followed conference presentations. It was recognition of something deeper, the acknowledgement of sacrifice and service, and the healing that could come from confronting past trauma instead of running from it. After the conference ended, Sloane, Elijah, and several members of SEAL Team 3 gathered at a quiet restaurant near the waterfront. Master Chief Sullivan and Commander Barrett had both attended her presentation and had witnessed the reunion with Elijah. So, Barrett said after they had ordered drinks, I'm guessing this wasn't planned. I had no idea he'd be there, Sloane admitted. I haven't seen or talked to any of the survivors since we were extracted from that valley. I saw the conference announcement 2 weeks ago and decided I needed to come, Elijah explained. Needed to tell you what your refusal to quit meant. Not just for me, but for everyone my life has touched since then. He pulled out his phone again and showed more photos. His wedding, his daughter at various ages, family gatherings, a life fully lived because one corpsman had refused to accept that anything less than total effort was acceptable. You know what got me through the really hard times, Elijah continued, remembering that you didn't quit, that even when everything was falling apart and we were losing people and it seemed hopeless, you just kept working, kept fighting. Kept believing that the next person could be saved, even if the last one couldn't. That example, that refusal to give up, that's what I carry forward. Sloane listened to him talk about his life, about his daughter, about the work he did as an EMT, and slowly something shifted inside her. The guilt didn't disappear. It probably never would entirely, but it changed shape, transformed from a crushing weight into something more like a foundation. A reminder of what was at stake, a motivation to keep doing better. I've been running from that day for 3 years, she said quietly, using work to avoid processing it, trying to save enough people to balance the 9 I lost. But Elijah, seeing you, hearing about your daughter, her voice caught. Maybe the point isn't balance. Maybe the point is just to keep moving forward, to honor them by living fully instead of just surviving. That's exactly what they'd want, Elijah agreed. I've thought about them too. Lieutenant Morrison saved my life twice in that valley, once by making the call to run for high ground, once by physically pulling me when I couldn't move on my own. He made it out with us, but died 6 months later in another operation. And you know what he told me before that last mission? He said living for the ones we lost meant actually living, building something, creating something, not just existing. The evening continued, stories being shared and laughter mixing with tears, as wounds that had been carried alone for too long finally found space to be examined in community. By the time they parted ways, Sloan felt lighter than she had in 3 years. Not healed, healing wasn't a destination, but an ongoing process. But lighter, more whole, more capable of carrying what needed to be carried without being crushed by its weight. 1 year after that deployment, Sloan Callahan stood in the training facility at Naval Base Coronado, watching 15 Navy corpsmen and Army medics participate in the first iteration of the dual-role medical operations course. The program she had proposed in her conference presentation had been approved, funded, and implemented. She was the lead instructor. The students were selected from medical personnel who had expressed interest in expanding their capabilities and who had passed rigorous psychological screening. They came from various units and backgrounds, but they all shared a common trait: they wanted to be more effective in austere combat environments where traditional role separation could cost lives. "All right, everyone," Sloan called out, bringing the class to attention. "Today we're conducting a practical exercise that will test your ability to transition between medical care and precision shooting under stress. You'll respond to a simulated casualty scenario. While you're treating the casualties, hostiles will appear in designated positions. You'll need to assess whether the threat requires precision engagement, transition to shooting if necessary, eliminate the threat, and return to medical care. All within a time window that reflects actual combat conditions." She looked around at the faces watching her, some nervous, some confident, all serious about the training they were receiving. "Before we begin, I want to make something clear. The skills you're learning here are exceptional. Very few medical personnel will ever need them. But in those rare situations where they are needed, they can mean the difference between everyone coming home and losing people because you didn't have the right capabilities at the right moment." She paused, thinking about that valley 3 years ago, about Marcus dying, while she took the shot that would complete the mission, about Elijah and his daughter named Sloan. "I'm not going to lie to you, this dual role is hard. It challenges everything you've been taught about medical ethics and the separation of healing from harm. You will struggle with it internally. You will have moments where you question whether you can be both things. And that's okay. That struggle means you're thinking carefully about weighty questions. The only thing I ask is that you don't let the struggle paralyze you when lives are on the line." She looked directly at each student in turn. "Your job is to save lives. Sometimes that means medical intervention. Sometimes it means neutralizing threats before they can cause casualties. Most of the time it means being smart enough to know which response the situation requires. Any questions before we begin?" A young Army sergeant raised her hand. "Ma'am, how do you decide in the moment when you're treating casualties and threats appear? How do you know whether to keep treating or transition to shooting?" It was a good question, the kind that didn't have a simple answer. You assess based on immediate threat to life. If continuing medical care means everyone in the area is at risk, you address the threat. If the threat is being adequately managed by others, you continue medical care. If you're the only one who can do both and both are needed, she paused, then you prioritize whatever saves the most lives. And you accept that sometimes there's no perfect answer, only the best decision you can make with the information you have in that moment. The training exercise commenced. Sloan watched her students work through the scenarios, making decisions, learning from mistakes, developing the mental flexibility required to operate effectively in both roles. Some struggled, a few excelled, most fell somewhere in between, capable but needing more refinement. Master Chief Sullivan joined her at the observation point, watching the exercise unfold. "You've built something important here, Doc. This program is already getting attention from other units. Special Forces wants to send students. Marine Corps is asking about implementing something similar. It's not about me, Master Chief. It's about creating capabilities that save lives." Sloan kept her eyes on the students. "Every person who completes this training is someone who can respond more effectively when things go sideways. That ripples forward in ways we'll never fully see. Like a certain EMT in Baltimore and his daughter." Sloan smiled. "Like that. Like Lieutenant Morrison making the decision to run for high ground, even though it meant leaving people behind. Like Marcus pushing me out of the line of fire. Like 9 Marines whose sacrifice created a hole in the world that I'm spending my life trying to fill with something meaningful." Sullivan was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know what I've noticed over the past year? You've stopped running. You're still carrying weight, probably always will, but you're not running from it anymore. You're walking with it. There's a difference." The counseling helped. Elijah appearing at that conference helped. Building this program helped. Sloan gestured at the students conducting their exercise. And honestly, accepting that I can be both things, corpsman and shooter, healer and warrior, that helped most of all. Turns out you don't have to choose. You just have to be honest about the complexity and find ways to manage it. Think you'll stay in this role long term? Or is teaching the new path forward? I don't know. Right now I'm focused on making this program successful. After that, she shrugged, I'll figure it out. But whatever comes next, it will be about creating value, about honoring the people I couldn't save by making sure more people can be saved. That's the constant. Everything else is just tactics. The exercise concluded. Sloan called the students together for debrief, providing feedback that was detailed, constructive, and grounded in real-world experience. She pushed them to be better while acknowledging that what they were learning was difficult and didn't come naturally even to exceptional individuals. That evening, after the students had departed and the equipment had been secured, Sloan found herself alone in the training facility. She pulled out a photo that she carried with her, always 9 names engraved on a memorial plaque taken at Arlington National Cemetery the last time she had visited. Corporal David Jensen, Private First Class Timothy Wade, Lance Corporal Marcus Brennan, Sergeant Christopher Thorne, and 5 others whose names she carried in her heart. I'm trying, she whispered to the photo. I'm building something that matters, teaching people to be better, creating capabilities that save lives. It's not enough to bring you back. Nothing could be enough for that. But it's something, and I promise I'll keep making it something more. She thought about Elijah and his daughter Sloan, about the students in her training program who would go forward and save lives in ways she would never witness, about the ripples that spread forward from every decision, every action, every refusal to quit when quitting would be easier. Master Chief Sullivan had been right. She had stopped running. The weight was still there, the grief, the guilt, the complicated relationship with her own capabilities. But she was walking with it now instead of fleeing from it, and somehow that made all the difference. Sloan Callahan left the training facility as the sun set over San Diego, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students to train, new questions to answer about how to integrate roles that seemed contradictory but weren't. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, she felt something approaching peace. Not the absence of pain, not the resolution of all conflict. Just the quiet recognition that she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she needed to do, honoring the fallen by living fully rather than just surviving. It wasn't perfection, it wasn't closure, but it was enough. And sometimes enough was everything.